Well, Wes Streeting has given an interview today. He says he's been among those at the forefront of the government's response to Elon Musk. It was, of course, Elon Musk's many tweets, over hundreds of tweets, literally over 200 tweets on British politics in the last sort of 10 days or so, that has meant that people are talking again about this story. I think quite a number of media outlets have dropped the ball on this and are talking about it simply through politics. And listen, I'm a political specialist, as most people know. I talk about politics almost every day of the week. It's what's fascinated me since I was a young boy. But what we need to remember in all of this is not just a political row. It's about the people, the women, the children at the centre of this. And that's why I want to talk to Fay Maxted, who's Chief Executive of the Survivors Trust. But first, I want to talk to Jim Gamble, who's a child safeguarding specialist. And there's a lot of questions around, I think, how the police deal with this, how they have dealt with this, what the National Crime Agency has done or not done. But Jim has dedicated his professional life to this as the former head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command Centre within the National Crime Agency. Jim, I'm sure you don't want to get involved in the political round. I'm not asking you to do so. But what do you make of the debate in the last sort of 10 days or so? How informed has it been? Because we have a load of viewers and listeners who are really, really worried about this, who think it's a huge problem, who want politicians to deal with it. Some people calling for a national inquiry, some people saying local inquiries are a better thing, or alternatively, in some people's view, just for the police to do their job. What is your take on the last 10 days or so, Jim?
Well, I think it's been really interesting, and whilst I don't agree with the way in which, or the language, in fact, that Elon Musk has used, and I think it's for others to decide, but some of it, to me, if it was coming from a citizen within this country, would in fact be considered potentially criminal. But it has highlighted the issue, and it has accelerated a contemporary debate within it. And of course, as you've already said, different sides of the political spectrum have weaponized it. That said, I have some sympathy with what Wes Streeting is saying. I think we need to be careful that what we're going to do here is target the criminal activity, not target particular communities. And if you look at group-based offending, the vast majority of that statistically is going to come from groups of white men predominantly. So there are trends and themes and patterns, and we can't ignore them. But the principal trend or theme that you need to consider is that victims are always going to be coercively controlled. Their vulnerability is going to be enhanced. The abnormal is going to be normalized to the point whereby they no longer recognize that they're victims. And that creates a difficulty. And from the perpetrator's point of view, they minimize, they self-justify, and they blame others. So they will use and abuse anything, whether it's their own perverted view of a cultural belief that says, well, this is okay because this is a lesser person. That's classic minimization, and it's something that cannot be ignored. But it happens across the board in all types of communities. And when you talk about gangs, I mean, young people are being sexually exploited by criminal gangs across the UK, and I include Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, that's not going to be from Pakistani, British Pakistani men. That's going to be from those who operate in environments, within the criminal fraternity, where they're able to apply coercive control without actually trying, because some young people are so vulnerable they'll feel safer under their wing.
Tell us a bit about that, actually. Just drill down a little bit to that, Jim, because I'm fascinated when you say people, I've written down your words here, no longer recognise they are victims. How can someone how can a child get to that? They're emotionally manipulated, they're obviously physically manipulated as well, but the emotional, psychological manipulation, just tell us a little bit about how the gangs work in that regard, because I find that both horrifying and fascinating, and I think a lot of people watching and listening will wonder about that, and I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I'm happy to do that. What I say, you've got someone coming on to speak about survivors, and I think their words will be more credible than mine, but having spoken and worked with a number of survivors of this particular crime type. You're talking about young people who at a particular time in their life feel alienated or isolated, perhaps from family, perhaps from friends. And the greatest gift that a groomer, and that's what these people do, they groom them, can provide, isn't money. It's actually friendship, making them feel that they're part of something, making feel that you're part, you're one of us. And whether that's a gang in London operating on the fringes, or directly involved in drugs and drug trafficking, or county lines moving drugs across the country, or a gang that are identifiable by their ethnicity, who are working together, in that type of environment, they bring you in. They make you feel special. You're now one of us. You belong. You've got the protection of the group. And as they do that, they begin to normalize abnormal behavior. Of course, providing sexual favors to them. Well, that's normal. That's what we do. That's who we are. To the point where I've had victims, and survivors of this awful abuse tell me that they'd really lost track of what was right and what was wrong. And it was only in one case that I can think of, and I won't name the young person, but they wrote a really powerful book where they actually had to be removed for a significant period of time before they could look back and see how they'd been exploited. Because one of the things they told me is the person that prevented social care from engaging, that prevented the police from taking effective action at that critical moment in time was me, because I believed that I was part of this. And that's part of the seduction and the grooming that goes on, whereby young people make it more difficult. And I'm not blaming them, because the problem is there's too much victim blaming goes on. So we've got to understand that when you're dealing with a victim, first and foremost in these cases, you've got to get beyond their reticence to engage. That may be because it's been normalized, it may be because of fear, and it may be because of fear for their family or others. So it's extremely complex, and it is ruining lives, and these young victims carry a legacy of pain. But it happens everywhere. You have this debate about how many cities is it happening in. Well, if you want to identify cities by ethnicity, then you're starting from the wrong place. How many cities are children being exploited in? And the answer to that is every city.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on whether a national inquiry is a good idea, a local inquiry, whether I've absolutely no doubt, I have not a scintilla of doubt that you at every point in your career, Jim, have done your job. But is the police in general doing its job? Because there are a lot of people who are worried about this. You've talked about victims and police being able to do their job effectively. But is there a grip on this?
I don't think there is the type of total grip that there should be. And let me explain why. You talk about Seop and you talk about it being part of the National Crime Agency Command. Well, actually, it wasn't in my day. I resigned because Seop was being dissolved and actually assimilated into the NCA. And I thought that was wrong, because when we first built Seop, actually under the former Labour government, it was built to be the one place where safeguarding children was the priority, not a priority amongst many. So within the institutions that deliver safeguarding, including social care, education, health, and of course policing, there would be one place that aggregated knowledge. We had the first missing desk, and we understood that going missing, and the longer you're missing, means the greater the chances that you're going to suffer more and more exploitation. But that was politically vandalized when we had an election and the Conservatives came in and decided, no, we're going to push this into our new flagship, the National Crime Agency. And I think that was a fundamental error. Because to get this right, you need a holistic approach that begins with education. Yeah. How do we educate and empower children in safe spaces in schools? How do we educate and empower parents? How do we make sure that colleagues in health understand what to look for and what to do when they see it? And of course, there's a piece of work to be done within policing. And I myself, in reviews, have seen in recent years, there's still victim blaming. There's still a reticence to engage and challenge for fear of offending.
But and talking about that engaging and challenging, I wonder specifically, look, statistically, it is a fact that the vast majority of paedophilia that happens in this country is by white men. That is true. But this particular issue is one which Pakistani Muslim gangs are absolutely a part of. It was on a mass scale. The police, the National Crime Agency, some would argue, had no inroads to those communities or intelligence. It was too difficult to penetrate the communities because of the culture, and many of the men are part of the communities that live entirely separately. I just wonder how big that a problem was and how that was tackled by you, and also how it can be tackled now.
Well, we tackled it going back to 2010, ending in 2011 when I resigned. by creating an intelligence desk to aggregate all of the information we had regarding vulnerable adolescents and how they could be pathwayed into harm and how we could provide interdiction strategies and support to local policing. But that was deconstructed on the basis of the political vandalism of the Conservative government when they threw that to one side. So the tactical deployment that occurred since was fundamentally focused on crime. And if you put child protection and safeguarding in amongst multiple agendas that deal with drug trafficking, that deal with borders, you can guess how that prioritization is pushed down the table. No matter what anyone says, I don't accept that that does not happen. I saw it in America, you know, after you had 9/11, when the FBI's Innocent Images Unit, you know, was pulled back into counterterrorism roles. There needs to be somewhere that advocates by, for, and behalf, and with a sole focus on our children and young people. In 2010, just after the Conservative government came in, Contact Point, a database that literally millions of pounds have been spent on, so that anyone from any part of the child safeguarding system could establish where a child was and what other agencies had an interest in them, so they could come together and work collaboratively.
Okay.
That was arbitrarily abolished in the August of the year after they came into power. So there's too much politics at play. And I think on this occasion, we shouldn't default to let's have another review. A review of what? Because we review silos, and that's the way we do it. We review them in isolation. We review...
But I just wonder what you personally, just finally, Jim, what you did in Seop and in the NCA specifically to investigate Pakistani grooming and rape gangs.
Well, you're talking about, I resigned in 2011. So personally, pre-2011, we began to identify the problem by creating teams within Seop that were fundamentally child-centred, focusing on learning about why what happened was happening. That's why if you look today, post all of the multiple reviews that have taken place where it's working well, you've got vulnerable adolescence groups looking at how long children are missing for, gang affiliation and gang association, because radicalization, sexualization, it is all about vulnerability, and vulnerability is extended whenever you haven't got, you know, that good parental oversight. Okay. Those agencies fundamentally focused on what's best for you. So let me finish by saying this. There are hundreds of reports out there. We talk about the J report as if it's a silver bullet. It's not. It deals with some good stuff about registration and about redress. But actually what we need is we need all of the key statutory agencies round table style, using an aggregated version of all of the reports to say, right, what are the practical solutions? Because where this really falls down is the speed within which criminal justice responds and the derisory sentencing on occasions. And if you look at this begins at one end with technology, ironically, given what Elon Musk is saying, where people get away for too much for too long. And even when they are caught, less, than 80% of those people caught downloading images. And this will be inextricably linked to everything we've talked about, go to prison.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are clear problems. Jim, thank you. That's Jim Gamble there. He's a child safeguarding specialist. There are clear problems with how this is dealt with in policing to this day. I want to talk to Fay Maxted now, as Chief Executive of the Survivors Trust. Fay, thank you for joining me this morning. What do you make of what Jim was saying there? Because clearly there are major issues. I mean, he's talking historically about the police, and I did want to tackle him a bit more on that. But listen, I suppose the point is that to this day, there are serious issues. And I wonder what you think, in all the noise that we've had over the last 10 days, Fay, where are victims in all of this?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on today. I think there's such a lot of good and positive in what Jim said, and I'm really heartened when I hear him talking about what we need is something that focuses solely on children. And, this is something that the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse included in their recommendations, a Minister for Children and a National Child Protection Authority. The reality is that, we have lost sight of the victims in this, because the children that are sexually exploited grow into adults. They're not getting the support they need. They're not getting the justice they need. And, even worse, we aren't seeing children now being protected in the way that they need to be. So we need to do something really drastic to change things.
Well, what is that drastic action, actually? Because we talked a bit about policing. I'm not sure Jim Gamble, I mean, he was very interesting to talk to, but I'm not sure he gave us too much information about what had actually been done in regard to specifically Pakistani grooming gangs, because this is a cultural problem, it is a crime problem. There's so many different aspects to this, and I wonder if you feel I suppose I want to ask you, Fay, what you feel the best way to get a grip of this is. Is it an inquiry? Is it just the police doing their job in a better way?
I think, like Jim said, you know, we have had lots of inquiries, we've had lots of reports, multiple recommendations, and few of them have actually been implemented. I think that's the issue with inquiries at the moment. There is no formal process following an inquiry that monitors the implementation of the recommendations, and therefore we're left with really valid, useful, helpful ways of changing child protection systems that aren't implemented, that aren't monitored across the country, and that's what we need.
And that is a political failure of successive governments. I mean, I've said this a number of times, but the J Review, for example, had 20 different recommendations. 18 of them were accepted by the Conservative government that did nothing in 18 months after the J Review. The Labour government has done nothing in 6 months. What do you think the most important thing to be done to protect children being raped today is, Fay?
I think we need accountability, and we need someone who is directly responsible for representing children at government level, because, you know, this is a political issue. It's a major scandal in this country. It's a huge risk for our children and young people, and we need to be really taking strong action. So we need someone at cabinet level who is responsible for representing children. We need a child protection authority.
But we do. I mean, the Education Secretary is responsible for children. Is she doing her job?
She's responsible for a lot of other things too. And I think, you know, we need to make sure that we have a specific focus on child protection and keeping our children safe.
Okay. Fay, how has this been for the victims that you've been speaking to in the last 10 days? Are they happy that people are talking about this, that we're actually trying to tackle it, or are they being re-traumatised by the fact that this has been talked about so much? What is your experience with people, obviously at the Survivors Trust, people you have helped, in regard to the national conversation that's going on here?
I think it's a mixture of reactions, and on the one hand, it's welcomed that the whole issue is back in the news again, back in the media very strongly. On the other hand, it's distressing to look back at all the inquiries and know that the recommendations that would have made a difference haven't been implemented. And as a survivor myself, I could think that's where I'm sitting too. I would like to see some action that does protect children, that makes sure there is support in place for survivors, and that, you know, we can really look at the data and see what's happening and take action accordingly.
In as much as you want to, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Fay, but you said you're a victim yourself. Can you tell us what happened to you?
I wasn't sexually exploited by a gang or a grooming gang, but sexually abused at a very young age.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Fay, and thank you for speaking to us this morning. That's Fay Maxted, their Chief Executive of the Survivors Trust. We also heard from Jim Gamble.